or whatever.
Uh-huh.
I don't find that to be more ergonomical.
No, I don't love the command. But whatever. Such is life. Hello, all. Hello.
Hello. I'm thinking of a descriptor.
You
Ah,
do that.
okay.
Let me pull up our thing real fast. Oh, I got to log in. It's been so long.
Mm.
Are you getting sick on me?
No, I like probably what it is. I was like pulling a bunch of laundry out. I think dust got all on my face. I was sick. I've been on
You are
antibiotics. I'm
sick.
good now. Just like everybody else was sick. We all got summer colds. What's up with that? Okay.
Yeah, I know. I was sick last week, but I'm better now.
Good.
Let's see if you want a shirt. I'm ready whenever you are.
I know. I'm thinking of a descriptor.
Okay.
I'm like just dry of whatever you want to call it.
We need some
Sorry,
baby
guys.
oil.
I know. I was thinking of something that wasn't too offensive. That's why. Everything that came to my mind was a little R-rated, so that's why I was like, I can't. This is a family show.
I believe
everything's just I can't make a pun. It's just it's all so bad. Okay, I know what it is.
Okay.
Wow. Maybe.
Everybody's so excited to hear it.
It's not that good. It's not baby oil. I'll say that much. Okay. I'm not gonna say that.
Oh my goodness.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Got 180 people waiting to hear your brilliant.
I know. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined as always by my salacious co-host, Brett.
That one works. Salacious. It is, yes. Salacious.
It works incredibly well. Brett, I don't know what's going on. You know, typically in the summer times, courts take a break. Judges, their staff
go to the beach.
Go on vacation. They go to the beach. And you know what? Because they run their courtrooms, they can schedule, when they have trials and whatnot. This has been the summer of trials, I think. I mean, we just finished the Karen Reed retrial. And we, of course, today are talking after the verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs trial, 7-week trial, has finally come to an end with a verdict. And my goodness, we are second day of July. This is not typically when we have this many trials. And then, of course, we had a somewhat surprising plea agreement deal in the Brian Kohberger Idaho murders case. So we are going to cover all of that today. And let's just say it. These are some of the most salacious facts of any case that is being covered this summer and that you'll probably hear in the media.
Yeah, I feel like we all feel dirtier after the Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, whatever we're calling him now, trial, Sean Combs trial. That one was rough, and obviously, I think a lot of people were disappointed in the verdict. I guess we can talk about that first. We can end with that, or start with that, end with Kohberger.
We'll start with the verdict.
Yeah, so obviously, and once again, this is another case where attempting to read tea leaves based on jury notes turned out not to be as effective as maybe you thought. Initially, you had an hour into the deliberations, you had a note from the jury saying that one of the jurors wouldn't deliberate. And usually that means you got 11 people who think he's guilty, one person who's like, whatever, he's not guilty, I don't want to hear it. And you just sort of assume that's what it was going to be. Then we got a note that said, essentially, if we've reached verdicts on 4 of the counts, but can't reach a verdict on the first one, what do we do? And I think everybody thought that means probably guilty on those 4 counts and hung on RICO. Because obviously, if you're not guilty on everything else, why would you say he's guilty of RICO? That just didn't really make sense. So I think most people thought that. So when we got news today that the verdict was coming back, that they had reached an agreement on RICO, I think most people thought this is going to be across the board guilty. But that is not what we saw. Essentially, there were 5 counts. There was the RICO count, which we'll talk about Then there were a couple sex trafficking counts, which were very serious. Have, I think, a 15-year mandatory minimum sentence up to life for those. And then 2 violations of the Mann Act, which is one of the most storied laws, the federal laws in the country. It goes back to the beginning of the 20th century. It was passed in the quote unquote white slavery panic, when there was this belief that people were being taken across state lines for prostitution. And so the Mann Act was passed, and it's actually caught a lot of famous people throughout the years. I think Jerry Lee Lewis got hit by it. A couple other like Chaplin got tagged with it, but he beat it. So you've had like this comes up. And of course, in Diddy's case, the accusation was that he had essentially hired sex workers and brought them to his various parties. And pretty much everybody agreed that had happened. I think everybody knew, unless something really weird happens here, he's going to be found guilty of that. So for him to have only been convicted of those 2 was certainly a major defeat for the prosecution, a victory for the defense. He went from looking at spending the rest of his life in prison to probably only a few years, and we'll talk about sentencing. So, it's a mixed bag as far as the verdict goes. I mean, you can count that as a win on your stats if you're the Southern District of New York, but you have to imagine that everyone was incredibly disappointed in how this went down.
Especially because this was a very expensive and long trial, a 2-month long trial, which it extended longer than that. But in terms of actual testimony with that many witnesses, is very, very draining on any prosecution team, as you may know. And I mean, they went, I mean, there were drugs involved. There were videos. There were, women alleging really, really incredibly violent acts that Combs committed against them. The facts were horrendous, and for the most part, they weren't denied so much as what was it consensual sex acts, or was it forced sex acts, which is obviously illegal. I think no one disputed that there were sex workers who were hired for these freak offs. The defense was basically like, it was all consensual. We were all there for parties. Everyone got lots of money. Everyone got lots of fame. Everyone was an adult. They could have left at any time. And obviously the prosecution's theory was no one could leave because of this criminal organization that Combs was at the helm of, that he was running these things. And even if things appeared to be consensual in the sense that maybe the women didn't leave, maybe the women didn't say, fight back physically when they were being beaten, it's because they were controlled by other means. And that's very common, by the way, in these sort of trafficking, sexual exploitation cases. We talked about this in our legal briefs episode about sex trafficking with Danny Pinter, whose life work is representing victims in these kind of sex exploitation trafficking types of cases. Is you don't typically see someone with, say, a gun to someone's head or a knife to someone's neck and saying, you're going to do these sex acts before the camera. That's not typically what happens. There's usually a long-standing relationship where a person is being groomed to think there is no other option to be doing X, Y, and Z. So because of the fact that these types of cases involve emotions, relationships, real relationships, right? A lot of Combs's ex-girlfriends were the star witnesses. It is a very much, which side are you looking at this case type of thing. And because we're not disputing the facts, if you follow the trial in this case, I mean, I think everyone agrees in the fact that the judge denied bond today, awaiting sentencing, because of Diddy's propensity for violence, shows that the facts were horrendous that came out in this trial, nor were they actually new. I think they've been in the news for a very long time. Now it's just part of a RICO case.
And look, I think if you want to see these sex trafficking charges start to stick more, we all have to change the way we look at sex trafficking. I think people have a very unrealistic view of it. Everyone thinks that sex trafficking is like, middle class mom of 2 disappears or college student disappears. Well, they've probably been sex trafficked. I mean, it's the first thing people say. And in reality, no, they've probably been murdered is what's happened. They have not been sex trafficked, because that's not how sex trafficking actually works. And people think, well, if you're not one of those people, if you're not one of these fine, upstanding citizens who are being forced into the sex trade, well, then it's not sex trafficking. It's just prostitution, right? And I think that view of it that a lot of people have stops juries from convicting sometimes, because, like Alice said, they view coercion through a very sort of literal lens.
I mean, I'll tell you the lens that we see a lot of people talk, because I've interviewed people who we have prosecuted for these types of crimes, and their response to me when I say things like, these are the charges you're looking at, is, I didn't do nothing. Because what trafficking is, if you grab a 12-year-old girl who's walking to school and you lock her in your basement, and then you do all these horrendous sex acts to them, and they're not free to leave, quite literally. You pass food through, barred doors, and they live in your basement. And there's those dramatic scenes where, a neighbor comes in and says, "Is someone down there?" And they're in their, basement that's been completely soundproof, and they're banging and saying, "It's me." That's trafficking. The reality is that those cases exist, and they are horrendous when we find out about them, but that is not the typical case, nor is that what is required, by the way, to convict someone of sex trafficking.
Sorry, my dog wanted to come in. I'm gonna let him do that. Yeah. And so essentially what you ended up having in this case, I think, is the jury bought that he had hired these sex workers. They didn't buy the coercion. So they found him not guilty on sex trafficking. And look, this was a messy case. It was a messy case from the beginning. A lot of personal relationships involved, a lot of initially consensual relationships, a lot of money changing hands, some messy testimony from prosecution witnesses. And so you can understand how the jury ended up where they did. RICO, go ahead.
And I was going to say, and to add to the messiness, a lot of the most salacious, most violent, most disturbing alleged acts from former lovers had passed the statute of limitations. And they had passed the statute of limitations because charges weren't brought at that time. Because a lot of people are asking, well, why wasn't he charged with rape, for example? Well, this is a federal case, and rape cases typically are with the state local jurisdiction. But it's because a lot of the most salacious, violent acts that were being that were testified to, actually charges weren't brought. And you can imagine how that comes off to the jury. Well, okay, so all these. This is what other talking heads will say. They'll say, well, all these people are only coming forward now because there's something in it for them. There's either money, there's fame. And if they really thought that these were such non-consensual acts, why didn't they come forward within the statute of limitations to report it?
Yeah, and I think that was a problem. And like Alice said, you had a lot of state crimes that were driving this. This is a federal case. And I think that's one reason they tried to bring the RICO charge. So RICO, number one, is incredibly difficult to prove. It's subject to an attack that you probably saw. If you watched any coverage on this, and anyone from sort of the defense perspective, they would always say things like, RICO's for the mob. That's what you go after Al Capone with. And that's true. I mean, RICO was initially designed to go after mafias, but it's not just for mafias. It's for any criminal organization that's committing crimes. And the reason you have it, imagine you have the mob. We'll just use the mob because it's easy. You got Don Corleone, and he's going to kill the top members of the 5 families. And he goes out and shoots them all, right? That's a state crime. It's murder. But he's Don Corleone, and as we know from The Godfather, he has all the judges in his pocket. That's what we learned at the meeting of the 5 families. So the state judges aren't going to throw the case out. They're never going to charge him. It's never going to go anywhere. So at some point, the federal government, the FBI, decided, hey, we need a way to prosecute what's essentially state crimes. And they came up with RICO. And the idea for RICO is you have a criminal organization committing state crimes, so crimes that you would not otherwise have federal jurisdiction over. But because they're doing it to advance the cause of the organization, that's going to be a federal crime. It's going to fall under the Commerce Clause and everything else. And so we can charge you with RICO. And if we prove that you committed those state crimes, then you'll be guilty of RICO. So that's what you had here. And so if you saw the jury form, the verdict form, you had guilty or not guilty on RICO. And then you had a list of different offenses, and it was proven or not proven. And the reason it's proven or not proven is because under RICO, you have to prove at least 2 predicate offenses. And you have to prove they advanced the organization. And I think this is where they ran into a problem, because Sean Combs is like Puff Daddy Entertainment or whatever it's called, right? And the organization is him. So there was a real question when he's, abusing his girlfriend or firebombing Kid Cudi's car or doing all these various state crimes that he's committing. Is he doing that to advance the criminal organization, or is he doing it for himself? If he's doing it for himself, then then he's not guilty. Because remember, the only reason you can go after those crimes is because they are to advance that criminal organization that the federal government can have jurisdiction over. And I think that was the difficulty. And it was the reason I didn't think he would be convicted of RICO, frankly, because proving that it was used to advance the interest of the organization versus the person is actually pretty hard. And I don't think the government was ever able to explain that, number one, because it's a complicated idea, but number two, prove it satisfactorily for this jury.
And you can imagine why, right? Like, let's go back to the mob example of what RICO was kind of used to go after. What does the mob do? Are they just violent for the sake of being violent? No, they do it for some criminal enterprise that makes them richer, right? It's to exploit people. It's to take over, I don't know, casinos or something like that. They don't just kill people for the sake of killing people. There's a point to it. It's a business. It is in order to make yourself lots and lots of money to control all those around you. So then you look at this. Okay, so is Combs just being violent towards women? It's not to make money. In fact, he's literally handing out bags of cash. He's handing out $100,000 here, $100,000 there. Horrible. Absolutely horrible. But you can see why the jury may be thinking, he's a horrible human being. We agree with you on that. But this isn't even a business. This is horrible. He's bleeding money. He's paying for his ability to be a horrible person. We don't agree. Even if you don't agree with it, he has a ton of money, $400 million or whatever. And if he wants to pay that person $100,000 so that he can, slather baby oil all over sex workers that he is hiring and paying, then that's up to him.
And I'll just say this. I know it's not sexy, but I thought they could have gotten him for embezzlement because
I thought money charges. Truly, I thought money
laundering, embezzlement, bank fraud, like all sorts of stuff. Because exactly, none of this is benefiting the organization. It's costing the organization, and he's essentially funneling cash from the organization into these criminal activities.
This is like campaign finance, right? Yeah. No, and like
tax fraud.
Hear me out. I have no love lost for Sean Combs. I'm not defending these actions. I'm explaining why this would have been really difficult under RICO. But I agree. The whole time I was like, guys, have we learned nothing from Al Capone? Always go for the money. Always go for the money, especially the more salacious it is. And you have someone he's a public figure. The things that he does, I can imagine a lot of people. And we saw this. We saw this among the entertainment industry. This is just the music industry. This is just this music industry. You don't get to be, the type of musical artist that he is or the media mogul that he is by being a nice guy. Like literally your songs are about being violent and about being like the baddest boy there is, right? And so this is all part of who he is, but it's not to make money. He's not taking over a casino. He's not selling these videos on like the Tate brothers are being alleged of doing, right? Like the Tate brothers are allegedly being, I don't know if they're being charged yet, but the allegation is that they got the videos and they're making money off of it. That's how they made their money. Not here. He just has these freak offs for his own satisfaction, and he's not even selling these videos. He does try to use them for blackmail, but again, you can see how is this fitting into a criminal enterprise, what RICO is used for. And by the way, that's also why RICO is very rarely brought now. Basically, after RICO was used by the federal government to bring down the tobacco industry, it's rarely used now. There's actually it's disfavored because if you can show other things, a lot of cases you're trying to go after because of, say, fraud or some other underlying crime. If you can charge the underlying crime, typically you're going to be encouraged to do that because of how difficult RICO is to prove.
And usually you can just charge a conspiracy. You don't have to charge RICO.
Right. And RICO is kind of a sexy way to say
conspiracy. Law enforcement loves RICO.
Yes, they do.
They always want to charge RICO. Always. And you're always like, guys, It's RICO. It's like really hard. Nobody ever gets convictions on it. And look, this is a Southern District of New York, sometimes called the Sovereign District of New York. They like to do things like this. They like to do these sort of complicated cases. There were probably other charges they could have brought. I mean, drug trafficking charges, distribution charges. There were some firearms charges that you might have been able to bring.
So many. He had like he obliterated
serial number.
Obliterated serial numbers. These are all federal crimes.
But they're not sexy.
They're not sexy. I'm going to keep going. They're not sexy, but also here's the thing. When you are bringing an indictment, especially one like this, that's really telling a story that goes far beyond just one charge, you do have to make judgment calls in terms of what charges you're bringing. Generally, you don't bring every single charge that's available. You have to think about the interplay of the different things and the different elements you have to meet. Because like we said, for example, I mean, there's drugs involved, there's guns involved. Those are all federal charges that they could have brought and they didn't. And I think, I mean, well, for one, if they did bring them, I think they would have been for sure guilty charges because there's no dispute that he had guns and drugs for one. Yeah. There's no dispute about that. Why they didn't, by the way, is if you think you have the story of saying being able to prove RICO, then you can use drugs, guns, obliterated serial number guns as enhancements to get greater sentences. But if you don't have the RICO charge, you can't stack the enhancements on it. And so where we're left with is you have these mandatory caps typically as to how much you can be imprisoned for certain charges. So you're probably seeing all over people are like, oh, he's facing a max, was it 10 or 20 years? 10.
Well, they're
10
saying
per.
20 because 10
because
per.
of each. So each count that he's been convicted of has a statutory maximum of 10 years. So everyone says, oh, well, 10 years for 2 counts, 20 years. That's consecutive. Of course, we've covered this before, that we actually go by the sentencing guidelines. Okay, there you go. There is a calculation. You thought you went to law school in order to avoid math, but alas, the sentencing guidelines is all about math. And it is based on calculating an offense level. So you see right here in section 2G 1.1, for what he was found guilty of, the base offense level is 14 for him. You can stack special offenses to get that number up. But what we're looking at essentially right now, and he has no criminal history, which actually, to be totally honest, I was a little surprised about.
I was surprised too.
I didn't know he had no criminal history. So all the stacks of cash really paid off over the years. So there's basically a chart where you have, it's like an X axis and a Y axis, and one axis is the base offense level and the other axis is your criminal history. So even if the base offense level for this crime, commercial sex act is 14, the more criminal history you have, the greater your sentencing guideline is. Sentencing guidelines, as we said before, it's not mandatory. It's a guide. This is the sentencing guideline. This is the federal sentencing guideline. So you can see like the horizontal, this is horizontal, is the criminal history. And then the vertical is the offense level. And you quite literally like take your fingers and find 14, and then you find he's a criminal history 1, because he has no criminal history, and you make your fingers meet. So here it's what 15 to 21 months is really what the base offense level is for the crime in which he's convicted of. Now you may say, well, at least times 2. He was found guilty of 2. Technically, yes, he could, but almost always, especially because they're the same charge that he's been found guilty of, judges almost always have them be served concurrently, so at the same time, rather than consecutively, not stacked.
So the government's already signaled how they're going to try and get this number up in their motion today, their letter. It's funny that they send letters into SDNY, I guess, about why he should not be granted bond. They went through their calculation of the guidelines. We'll put that up too. It's kind of hard to read, but essentially they're going to go for, so that's a base offense level of 14. They're going to try and get that number up. And the way they're going to try and get that number up are a few things. Number one, because there were 2 counts, they can do something called grouping. And by grouping, if you have a certain number of victims, you get a higher number. So it's not 14, it'll go up. So in this case, I think the defense is going to argue there were no victims for the Mann Act. There were just willing participants who were also breaking the law, so they shouldn't be considered victims. Who knows whether that'll that'll succeed or not. In addition to that, the prosecution is going to argue that there was obstruction of justice. Basically, I think they're going to say that he offered to pay various people to go away and not testify against him or bring charges, and that's going to be obstruction. And you can get a few more numbers for that. I think they're also going to say that he was a leader organizer of this scheme and try and get a few more points on that. A few problems for all this. Number one, I don't know about the obstruction. I mean, they talk about coercion a lot. They lost all of the counts with coercion, so that's going to be hard. As far as leader organizer, I mean, it's just him, right? So I don't know if he's leader organizer of a scheme involving one guy or not, because you lost the RICO count, right? So a lot of their proposed enhancements really seem to depend on coercion or RICO and this sort of thing. And as we're going to talk about, so this is just the first step, right? You're trying to figure this out. By the way, if the prosecution were able to get all of these enhancements added, let's say they succeeded, they could get him up to a 24. So he's at a 14. They're trying to add 10 levels. At 24, he's looking at 51 to 63 months. So basically 5 years. Basically 5 years in prison. I think probably that's the best they can do. Now, listen, this is just to establish the guideline range. The guideline range is not mandatory. It is an advisory guideline system. So the judge can do what we call varying. He can vary up, he can vary down. The defense is going to say, look, this is the Mann Act. These is all consensual. This is way overcharged. He's been in, now that he's going to have to stay through sentencing, he's been in jail for 12 months in really bad conditions. Time served. They're going to ask to vary down to time served. The prosecution's going to say, look, okay, fine, we lost these counts, but there's something called acquitted conduct. And at sentencing, when the judge can consider anything as long as it's proven by preponderance of the evidence. Remember, the jury decides beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge decides based on preponderance of the evidence. So a judge can say, I know you were acquitted of RICO, but they certainly proved it beyond a preponderance of the evidence. It's certainly more likely than not that you were engaged in activity. So I'm going to take that into account when I give you a sentence. I know you were acquitted of sex trafficking. I think you did it. I'm going to take that into account. So now I'm going to vary upward to whatever. Obviously, he could not go higher than 20 years, 10 years on both counts to be served consecutively. There's no way he does that. That's not going to happen. Although they're advisory, they're still subject to appeal. And if you go too far with this, you're going to lose, right? So the judge is not going to do that. I can imagine the judge is probably going to grant some of these enhancements that the prosecution is looking for and deny some. I really feel like 60 months just feels like what this judge might give him. So that's going to be my guess. I'm guessing 60 months. I wouldn't be shocked, though, if it's
I was going to say,
nowhere near that.
I'm going to guess in the 3 to 5. 5 is like best case scenario for the prosecution. I'm thinking in the 3 to 5 year range. And remember, time served counts. He's already been in jail for 12 months, and he's going to be in jail pending sentencing as well. Now the federal system does not have like good time served, but there is actually a little, you can get a little bit off. But unlike the state system where you can have people serve just like 10 to 20% of their actual sentences, that's not the case. So if he gets 5 years, he will probably serve just shy of 5 years. And then, of course, there's, supervised release after that. But he'll keep his nose clean, I'm sure of it.
And remember, he's been in jail for like 10 months. So that all counts. So whatever he gets, that comes off. As Alice said, you have to serve at least 85% of your sentence. So if he were to get 5 years, I mean, that's 60 months. So he could get 9 years off, or 9 months off, I guess. So, I mean, he's going to be out in a couple years.
Yeah.
It's just a fact.
And the other thing with in your sentencing memo is where you ask for these enhancements. It's a briefed, they're legal arguments on both sides. You cite the law on all of these things. It's appealable. That's why the judge can't just be like, yeah, we grant all of these things. I think some of the enhancements that the prosecution's asking for is a bit of a reach based on what the jury came back with in terms of their verdict. So I think even if the judge wanted to grant, he's going to be, this will for sure, there will be an appeals process. And so you have to protect, we call it appeal protect your sentence here.
And let me say this. There were some people who thought, well, if he's going to give him time served, he won't hold him pending sentence. Not necessarily, because if he wants to give him time served, now he'll have a couple more months. So like if he wanted to give him, say, 12 months or 18 months or something like that, right? Letting him stay out and then sending him back to jail for 4 months, that's kind of silly, right? So we don't know what's in the judge's mind, and we don't know how seriously he's taken the allegations that I think were pretty much proved against Combs, and we'll see what happens. Some of you have asked, number one, they're not going to bring more federal charges related to all this.
You have a
Probably
nucleus of
couldn't do it,
facts, so you can't. It's not meant to be a gotcha. You know, we said embezzlement. If it's based on the same nucleus of facts, you don't get to play games. You have your one shot at your indictment here. So if there's newfound evidence of a different criminal enterprise, and he might have lots of criminal enterprises. Let's say he filed false tax returns, and it had to do with the money that is at issue here, that's fair game. But you can't kind of splice and dice and say, okay, these freak offs, we weren't able to prove RICO. Let's go for conspiracy now. Let's instead say that he was in a conspiracy with, X, Y, and Z, some of the witnesses who testified. And it had nothing to do with a criminal enterprise. It was just a conspiracy to, I don't know, X, Y, and Z. Or these guns were used in the freak offs. You can't do that. So, and that's correct.
State charges, though.
Huh? You could absolutely, because remember, they're different sovereigns. You guys, legal briefs, we've been around now long enough that we've really covered all of these different legal concepts. The state can certainly bring charges because they are a different sovereign. So there's no double jeopardy issue when the feds bring charges and the same nucleus of facts or even similar charges are brought on the state side. So here's to you, New York.
Yeah. And look, and probably Florida too. I mean,
and Florida. Yep.
We'll see whether any state prosecutors want to take this on at this point, but this always felt like to me a bunch of state crimes that states should have prosecuted, didn't prosecute, and the feds tried to come up with a creative way to charge it. That's what it always seemed like.
And I think that's right. And part of it may just be this is a really big case. And to put the theories together to investigate for any local DA's office, it's a big lift. Now, if you're in New York City, that's, they also have a very high caseload. So I can understand how this is like a huge mountain for a lot of state prosecutors to face when they have a lot of other cases they need to be prosecuting. But I don't know. There's a lot of crimes that have been testified to. You have witnesses. There are things you don't have to just go with the ones that are outside of the statute of limitations, but there was a lot of conduct that was testified to that was incredibly disturbing. That is now all in the public, under sworn testimony, subject to cross-examination.
Yeah, and we're going to know soon. His sentencing was set for October, but he has asked for expedited sentencing, which the judge is going to rule on. I mean, I don't know. Why would you want that? He wants to go to prison because if he's given any time, he's going to serve it in a low security facility, which is basically like club fed. It's the nicest prisons you can be in.
I will just note this. So Brett and I visit a lot of, witnesses, criminal defendants in prison. There is one that we go to that is the lowest security prison. It looks like summer camp. There is a lake. They get to drive cars off campus. I called it a campus. I didn't even call it prison. They quite literally get to drive if they've proven themselves that they can drive off to drive people to dentist appointments and to go grocery shopping in town. And I'm not making light of this. It's that light of prison. A lot of my white collar criminals went there because they did not have a propensity for violence. Now, in this case, hopefully there will be some, some restraints put. But I'm not kidding when I said when I drove into this lowest security prison, there were beautiful trees, there was an arch, there was Spanish moss, there was a beautiful lake that I wouldn't swim in it because there's probably alligators in it. But I will say that things got floated down that river all the time that were contraband. Not giving anyone ideas here, but that's how low security it is, and they could freely walk. They're not in shackles. They're actually in plain clothes, in fact, and they get to walk from building to building, to go to arts and crafts, to go do research, to spend outdoor time to play basketball. Not gonna lie, really is like summer camp for like criminal defendants.
Their volleyball courts have stands.
Yeah.
So like you can have like you can cheer for them. They don't have cells. It's just like, beds. They have like little spaces in a room. It looks like a dorm, frankly. It's like they made an old school dorm. So anyways, right now he's in the Manhattan Detention Center, which is he does not want to be in. So they want to get him sentenced as soon as possible so that anytime he does serve, he'll serve there. So look, if you were hoping for a lot of justice in this case or for him to get slammed, it's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And I don't really know what to say other than that. It's disappointing. It's disappointing that you had these people who suffered so much and were willing to come forward and willing to testify and were not vindicated. But I think, as we've said in other cases where this happens, education's key.
I will say this. I understand the fear of a lot of the women who testified against him. He is going to be out. I can, a lot of people, they testified. There was a lot of fear in doing so, which goes, I think, to the story of why they didn't bring charges back within the statute of limitations because of the hold. A lot of them were very young when they met him, teenagers, young 20s, didn't have money of their own, that sort of thing. And I'll say, if I testified against him, I would be a little scared because he is clearly, based on the way they testified, they truly think that he's incredibly violent and he has the means to do something about that. So I mention that because while the rest of the world moves on from a verdict, being a part of a trial as a witness like this is with you forever. I'm not saying that Combs would do anything. I'm saying as witnesses, we talk to a lot of witnesses who've been involved in these sorts of things, and many suffer PTSD and will say, I never want to go to the police about anything again. I never want to testify in another trial again. I'm just going to keep my head down. Hey, buddy. And those are very real externalities of cases like these. So, there are so many strands to trials like these, and that is just but one of them.
So that brings us, I think, to Kohberger. There's not much more to say on Sean Combs. And the good thing about the Brian Kohberger case is they won't find him not guilty. He will not be acquitted. He has pled guilty. He has admitted what he did. He has taken responsibility for the murders in Idaho. So, all the conspiracy theories and everything else can fall away. This was a surprise, but not really. I mean,
this is what should have happened.
Exactly.
The evidence was truly, we saw the warrants. Every piece of evidence that we saw was pretty overwhelming. And once the defense, they tried different tactics, suppressing things. And when they lost those legal motions, which they should have brought, we've always said this, you do plead not guilty. You're going to try to keep out different pieces of evidence, see what evidence the prosecution is left with to go to trial and what theory they can go with. And once you're left with that, basically, spectrum of evidence, it becomes clear what's going to happen. And the defense, we said this, good defense counsel will get him to plead guilty. I didn't know if he would, but this was the correct outcome, both for the prosecution as well as for Kohberger.
And I'll say this, this is 100%. This is what should have happened. This is what happens in most cases, because basically you had a good attorney who knew if all the evidence comes in, we're going to lose. So she spent a lot of time fighting on procedural grounds, trying to get evidence suppressed, trying to hit the prosecution for leaks, like all this sort of stuff, and lost across the board, and knew that she wasn't going to win on an appeal, right? She wasn't going to appeal those and win. The judge was in solid ground. If she lucks out and wins one, great, but she didn't. So then all she can do is save her client's life. And, we talked about this before. Her personal interest was to try this case. It was to try this case. It was to be on television. It was to get out there. It was to be seen. It was to write a book, right? I mean, that would have been her personal interest. Huge trial, huge case, feather in her cap. Doesn't matter whether she wins or loses. But her client's interest was to plead guilty and avoid the death penalty. And she did what was in her client's best interest. And it was refreshing to see that. And she is representative of the vast majority of defense counsel across the country. This is how it's so good. It's so nice to see it happen the way it's supposed to happen, because usually the cases we see, it doesn't go the way it usually happens. And it really, I think people's faith in the system and how it works and defense counsel and everything else is just shattered by it. But just know this is far more common and than what you've seen in some other high profile cases.
In fact, I think the stat is this is what happens in like 90+% of criminal cases, because you see what, and in this case, truly the evidence, you had cell phone data, you had DNA, you had, like guilty conduct, after the fact, knowing and going back to the scene of the crime, those sorts of things. But I've seen a lot of people say, why would the government with such strong evidence accept a guilty plea? They should want to go to trial. Okay. I think we've already seen in our summer of trial, the jury is a black box. That's why we've always said, if you're guilty and you're like really guilty, you may want to just take that black box, because who knows? You get that one person on the on the jury who's like, no matter what, the government's always, there's always a conspiracy and there's always collusion among the law enforcement officers to make sure that they win this case. So I don't believe anything law enforcement says. You may get that person, and we've seen that in several jury trials that we've seen lately. So jury trial is always going to be an element of black box. You don't know what the jury is thinking. Also, trials are incredibly time intensive. The Combs trial took 2 months. It wasn't just 2 months. It was years of investigation, then all of the prep leading up to it. What does that mean? That prosecution team cannot investigate or prosecute other cases while they are all in on trial prep and in trial. That means resources are not unlimited. It takes away time from other types of cases. And then on top of that is the incredible drain on witnesses who have to testify. I just said that about the Combs trial. These women and many other people who testified, this is going to be part of their lives forever. However it has affected them emotionally, mentally, is untold. And they may never truly, be able to come to terms with it. Same here. I know we're going to get to victims and what do victims' families have in terms of a role in the plea deal. But here's this. The no murder trial is easy. We're walking through the West Memphis 3 trial right now in our other podcast, The Prosecutors, and the family members having to sit through those sorts of things. Even if family members are like, I'm ready for it, just know it is one of the most hellacious things to be a prosecutor, and know that the rest of the world is now seeing everything in your case file on these victims that is really cannot be unseen, and it will be seen for the rest of all time. That will have real impacts on victims and their families and loved ones. All of these things put together, almost never, no one is entitled to a plea deal. A defendant can always plead guilty, even without a plea deal. So at any point, a defendant can always say, I plead guilty. No deal at all. I'm just saying I did it. They can always do that. But no defendant is entitled to a plea deal where the government, in exchange, for example, in this case, takes death penalty off the table. Now, in this case, most times, even when the evidence is as strong as it is in this case, the prosecution will offer some sort of plea deal. You'll see they didn't give up much other than the death penalty. He didn't plead guilty to like 2 of the murders or 1 of the murders. You'll see that sometimes where you only plead guilty to 1 of the charges because it's going to, lessen your sentencing guidelines or something like that. Nothing. They basically had him plead guilty to everything.
And look, I don't know how much this factors in, and I don't know how much it should factor in, but remember, this was the state of Idaho against him, and they represent all the different interests. They don't just represent the victims. We'll talk about the victims in a second. But one group of people that really benefited from this were the roommates. Because, number one, they were going to have to get up on that stand and testify about the worst night of their life. Number two, the Kohbergers were just getting started, okay? They were gearing up to blame these survivors for the murders, to claim they were involved, to claim that Kohberger was completely innocent, that these are the people we need to be looking at, and they would have convinced people. Maybe the jury wouldn't have been convinced, but they would have convinced people. And there would have been a lot of people from now until the end of time who would believe that Kohberger was innocent. Think about the Jeffrey McDonald case. Jeffrey McDonald has always maintained his innocence, even though he is guilty as sin. And in doing that, has built up a large following. There are documentaries about how he's innocent and how it was really these other people who did it. That would have happened in this case. Because he pled guilty, there will still be some lunatics who think he's innocent, but they are a bunch of idiots, right? And nobody cares about them. They're not going to convince anybody. They're like a small group. If this had gone to trial, there would have been a real core of people who always believed that he was innocent and would have cast doubt on these other people for the rest of their lives. So we have avoided that for the most part. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that's something in today's world you have to consider. The other thing I'll say, we wrote an article about this on the True Crime Times. Everybody should subscribe, laying this out. But the death penalty it's not like if they had convicted him, he automatically would have gotten the death penalty and they would have taken him out back and the firing squad would have been waiting and they would have shot him. I am a big supporter of the death penalty. I've had one defendant executed. I got 2 on death row. I got 1 who died waiting to be executed. Is my former boss used to say his final appeal was granted. I'm a big proponent of the death penalty, but you have to look at it with clear eyes. Idaho has people who've been on death row for 20, 30, 40 years. Kohberger would have been tried. They were going to send out 10,000 jury questionnaires. That's what the judge said today.
Geez.
They were getting ready to send out 10,000 jury questionnaires because you have to get jurors who are unbiased on the guilt phase and are unbiased on the sentencing phase, the death penalty phase. That would have been really hard to do. And I will just tell you, when you have to get a unanimous death verdict, I forget the Parkland shooter in Florida. Florida loves executing people, right? And that was a horrific crime. They could not convince 12 people to give him the death penalty. I think Brian Kohberger obviously should get the death penalty, but you don't know that a jury's going to find him guilty and give him the death penalty. And say they did, then he's got 30 years of appeals. You have to hope his conviction doesn't get overturned on some sort of technicality. Look at Glossop in Oklahoma. That guy, they've tried to execute that guy like 15 different times. They tried him twice. If they had just sentenced him to life without parole, we wouldn't even know who he was, and he'd be rotting in prison. Instead, he's getting ready for his next trial, where they're not even going to seek the death penalty, which is probably smart. You don't know. I mean, Kohberger, he could have gotten his conviction overturned on some sort of technicality. Genetic genealogy is involved here, and that's always sort of, there's a froth there. We don't know what the law is going to be. Who knows if we're even going to have the death penalty in 30 years? I mean, it's a controversial political issue, right? Who knows if Idaho will even have it in 30 years? Who knows if he'll live that long? And he's going to be operating this innocence campaign the whole time. So while I understand the desire to have the ultimate penalty for him, and I fully support people who want him to be given the death penalty, you have to look at this realistically. And if he's willing to go, he's 30 years old. If he's willing to rot in prison for the next 50 years with no hope of ever getting out, that's a pretty good deal.
And no appeals.
No appeals.
So that there is finality, true finality for the prosecution, for the state, for all the victims and the victims' families in this case. That truly it makes complete sense as the prosecution, especially with the sentence that he will get. And the other thing is, this is not an Alford plea. He does not get to maintain his innocence and say that the evidence was there. He pled guilty. And so the way these plea deals work is, remember, we've always said this, what the prosecution has to prove are the legal elements of the crime. You don't have to prove motive. We all want to know why. What possessed this monster to kill 4 people in their sleep for seemingly no reason? I mean, this is the stuff of nightmares. And the answer is we don't need to know for purposes of conviction. And that's deeply frustrating. And it's deeply frustrating for those of us who want a Netflix documentary. He can always say it at any time. I don't know that he will. But all that's required is to show the evidence and for him to say, yes, I did those things, which he did. So a typical plea agreement, I'll show you a very simple one. A plea agreement for, say, 922G, a felon in possession of a gun. The elements are not going to say like, well, I had this gun because I needed protection, but I stole it from a neighbor and I hid it under my car. And when the cops came, I knew I shouldn't have it, but I did have it. That could be the real story. That's not the factual premise within the plea agreement. All it's going to say is talk about the elements of the crime. The gun was touched interstate commerce because it's federal. Yeah, there's language that you have that it maps the actual language of the statute. Essentially, it's there's a gun, it passed through interstate commerce, and he was a felon at the time he possessed the gun. That's it. There's no story as to how he got the gun, why he has the gun, why there was intent or motive or X, Y, and Z. And that's true for murder as well. That's why you didn't see this big colloquy as to why he did it, what drove him to this state. He can tell anyone he wants, but for purposes of his conviction, we got to hear him say that he killed 4 people and he owns up to it. And that's all we need for purposes of conviction. That may not be satisfying for like those people, Netflix streamers or whatnot, but that is all that's required for a conviction. And that is appropriate and also incredibly commonplace. This case actually is like every other criminal prosecution case, which is good because this is a hellacious quadruple homicide.
And I don't know what people thought they were going to get in a trial that they didn't get, because the trial was just going to be the prosecution presenting its case. Basically, all the things that you heard the prosecutors say they would prove today, they would have just put witnesses on to prove that. Kohberger wasn't going to get on the stand and say, okay, fine, I'm going to tell you exactly why I did this. Let me unburden myself. That wasn't going to happen. We weren't going to learn anything from him at trial. Going to trial would have just been, look, I can't talk about the families. A couple things about this. Number one, they were absolutely consulted about this. There was misreporting at the beginning that they didn't even know about this. That's not true. They were consulted. At least one family didn't want to go forward. Other families have expressed relief and support for this plea. There might have been people in the families that it would have been cathartic to sit through a trial. I wonder if they actually would have felt that way if they had to sit through a trial, particularly the parts where they talked about how their kids were murdered in sort of brutal, visual fashion in front of the world. I mean, these are things that they obviously, if they want to know, they can find out from the prosecutor, but not broadcast to the world, which is what was going to happen if we had this trial. And they would not have learned anything that we don't already know. And there was this expectation from some people that as part of the plea, he was going to stand up and give some sort of story. That's just not how it works. The plea you saw today, if you watched it, was absolutely standard. That is how pleas go in every courtroom around the country. There are circumstances where you sit down with the defendant and have them basically tell you everything. Usually that's because you're trying to figure out who else is involved in something. Is there like an organization, that kind of thing? And probably he just said, look, I'm not going to do that. And so you had to decide, is it good enough for him to admit that he killed these 4 people, or are we going to go to trial and accomplish the same end that we can get through his plea? So I know people were disappointed. The one thing I'll say, I give a lot of grace to the families because I can't imagine what it's like. I can't put myself in their shoes. I can't imagine it. The thing that was disheartening and that the judge commented on, and I think that all of us should learn a lesson from, the people who were calling the judge and leaving voicemails and emailing him, trying to get him to reject the plea. Number one, he can't. That's not his role. The plea is between the prosecution and the defendant. He can only reject a plea if it's not knowing, it's not voluntary, or if there's no actual factual basis. He has to protect the due process rights of the defendant to ensure that the plea is a valid plea. He can't reject it because, well, I think you should have to go to trial. This isn't, for instance, there's something called a C plea in the federal system where the judge is bound to give a certain sentence. This wasn't that kind of plea. The judge had no right to reject it. Alice has talked about this a lot. Alice loves talking about this. So I'm going to steal her thunder and then let her say it more eloquently, because I'm sure she will. The mob and the justice system are antithetical to each other. You do not want the mob running things. You don't want the mob making decisions. You don't want a judge to make a decision in a quadruple murder case because he got more voicemails from one side than the other. And I would just urge people in the future, reject the temptation to try and force something to happen outside of the justice system by being the loudest voice. Because when that happens, you don't have a justice system. You just have mob rule. And that is one thing we have to avoid. And I was glad that the judge took a moment at the beginning of the sentencing to say that wasn't appropriate.
Incredibly well said. No, I think that's exactly right. I'm glad the media campaign or the call campaign didn't work here, because like we said, that is also against Kohberger's interest. All these people calling on his behalf to reject it, or vice versa for the victims. The state is representing many interests, and of course victims factor into it, but they are also privy to much more than any of us outsiders watching know. I cannot say enough about the fact that there's finality in this case. This is the way it should be, for Brian Kohberger. He should go to prison and he should rot there. And he has waived all his rights to appeal. We will not hear about this case again. And I think that is great for the justice system and truly for the state of Idaho here. And I don't want mob rule. These different trials that we've been following this summer have really highlighted the dangers of mob rule. There's a reason the justice system moves slowly and deliberately. We want that to be the case. Mob rule is a loud voice that wants to tear it all down, but not replace it with anything. And if you tear it all down, there will be a vacuum and it will be utter chaos. It is not the world that you ultimately want to live in. Reform is something different than just mob rule. And so I just urge you all, when you're following these types of cases, don't go harass the judge. By the way, judges have dangerous jobs already. Okay. There's a reason that judges require protection by security, because there are a lot of people who want to hurt them for doing their job. Don't add to that chaos. There have been judges who've been assassinated. In our very own, neck of the woods where we are. These are very real threats. So keyboard warriors who are just typing these things out, let the judge know your thoughts. Maybe you're just some guy who wants to get your feelings out on Reddit. There's going to be someone else who reads that and tries to take action. So these are very real people that we're talking about. And I just urge all of you not to view this as a game. These are people's lives. And this case, even though it's captured media attention from the moment those poor 4 students were murdered, this case has taken a very natural progression in the way it should have because of the strength of the evidence. Almost all of our plea deals and most of our cases that we have prosecuted have ended like this.
Yeah. And look, I think a lot of people deserve a lot of credit. I mean, this was a very well investigated case. It wasn't an easy case to solve. I mean, this sort of goes to what we talk about sometimes, the expectation that there's always going to be a ton of forensic evidence in every case. This guy killed 4 people with a knife and left almost no evidence. If he doesn't drop that sheath, who knows whether they find out? Maybe they would have because of him driving around or the cell phone, but who knows, right? So this was a tough case to solve. The police did a great job. Prosecution built a great case. They did a great job with all those motions to suppress and everything else, winning those so that he was forced into this position. I mean, his defense attorney fought to the very end, tried to get the case delayed so that she could fight some more, I'm sure. But when it came down to it, this was the moment. Every defense attorney's been in this situation where you have to walk in, sit down with your client and say, look, we don't have it. You go to trial, you're going to lose. And if you lose, you're probably going to be executed. I can save your life. Let me save your life. And that's what happened. So Good. It's a good thing. Everybody should be celebrating this. This is a great end to this case, and he will never walk free again.
Nor will he hurt anybody else. And we haven't psychoanalyzed him, and I'm not a psychoanalyst, but I truly believe if he were not caught, this would not have been the end of the atrocities he would have committed. So I do think the world is a safer place because he will be behind bars for the rest of his life as well. Okay, well,
Okay.
that was a big day.
Yeah. Big day and
We
true
want to do
crime.
questions or something?
Sure. Let's do a question for our 369 closest friends.
Thank you guys for joining us on this.
Okay. I know it was short notice. I appreciate you guys. We weren't going to do one today, but it's like, man, so many things happened.
Hey, I know. Even yesterday we talked about it when we were recording. I was like, nah, let's not record tomorrow.
Yeah. Alice is like, I have all this work to do.
I still do have it, but
All
this is
this
also
work.
really interesting. I will say this. I had like requests all day through like, work to make comments on this. And I was like, save it for the live, y'all.
There you go. Love it. Okay, let's see. Sorry, I'm looking for a good one.
Some of you are asking if we'll learn all the evidence the prosecution had. No, it's not going to be like,
You'll learn some of it.
We'll learn some of it, but it's not typical that you'll just like open up the case files for a number of reasons.
I think probably there will be some open records requests and they'll get a lot of stuff, but obviously a lot of this is super, super sensitive. And so, you're not going to get that. Okay, let's see. Where's this question? I saw a question and I thought we should answer this question.
I know questions.
Oh, this is a good one.
Okay.
What is your dream vacation?
Any vacation. Sorry, too fast. I was just saying how it was so relentless. I'm not complaining at all, but this is just an intense phase of life because like I get woken, I don't have an alarm. I get woken up by one of my many children and then I get them out the door if at all. And then I work nonstop. And then they are all home and I feed them, get them to bed. And the second I lay down, Allison, the youngest, I literally walk into the closet to record. And then I'm going to go work after this. So really any vacation sounds awesome. But I don't know. I want to like walk El Camino or the Appalachian Trail, or I don't, there's so much that I want to do. I don't want to hike any mountains because we've covered way too many of them and it's not going to end well for me. But I love traveling and it's been a very long time since I've traveled and I love walking. Really, I do. I love all the national parks. We've talked about this. I would love to go on a national park tour at some point when my kids are old enough.
It's funny how your life changes when you have kids. I know we talk about this all the time, but if you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have said like buying a one-way ticket to some place and then spending months getting back home, which is what we've done that before. Right. And that's awesome. But now what I really want to do is I want to do things with my kids. So like, I really like skiing because my kids are really into skiing and my daughter loves to ski. And I love to ski with her. So I think right now my dream vacation is taking a week and going to the mountains and like following her as she skis down and she's like, Daddy, let's do the jumps. And I'm like, oh yeah, let's do the jumps. And then like I know I've told the story of it. She gets on the like trick range, right? With all the rails and the jumps and everything else. And she's like going over the jumps. And at one point, I was heading towards the jump, and I was like, if she can do it, I can do it. And as I'm going up the hill to start the jump, I was like, what in the world am I thinking? I can't do this. and I go up in the air and land, and like every bone in my body shatters instantly. But that's probably my dream vacation.
So my oldest is, you've heard this before, really, really into animals, like loves animals, so like more than people, for sure. He loves animals more than people. And so whenever he learns about a new like venomous spider or whatever that lives in the Amazon rainforest, he's like, can we go there? I'm like, yes, I would love to go to the Amazon rainforest with you. So you're right, like that would be so magical and so wonderful. One day, we're just a few years away from, I don't know, kids being out of diapers and stuff and being able to do it.
Yeah. Okay, so that was a fun question. This question fits what we're talking about. So I do want to answer this question. So, and this person was perfectly nice, left a 5-star review, but they did have some criticisms. And this is what they asked. Why do we only respect a jury's verdict when they convict? Why is justice not done? Why is justice was done for the victim only when a defendant is found guilty? Okay. Let me go ahead and answer that second part first, because obviously justice is only done for the victim if the person who committed the crime is convicted. That seems pretty straightforward. But on the first part, why do we only respect a jury's verdict when they convict? This is a category error that and I'm not trying to be mean to the person who asked this question, but it infects America today. And I think it is one of the reasons we have so much vitriol. People conflate respect with agreement. And they think you only respect someone if you agree with them. And if you don't agree with them, you don't respect them. I respect the jury's verdict in the Diddy trial. I respect the jury's verdict in the Karen Reed trial. I respect that those folks sat through all that evidence, went, discussed it with each other, and reached a verdict and said, this is not guilty. I respect that, but I disagree with it. And that is something you can do. And I think if people were able to respect each other, even in disagreement, we would be much better off. So it is not necessary. It's not as if when a jury returns a verdict, whether it's guilty or innocent, that you are required to change your view of the evidence and just say, well, I got to throw my hands up because the jury said guilty. So therefore, sorry, innocence campaign, jury said guilty. And I got to respect that verdict. So, even though there's evidence that says he's innocent, I can't oppose it because I got to respect the jury. That's not how it works. And I think people need to learn to respect each other when they disagree with each other.
Absolutely correct. And it's not just semantics. That's why in the Karen Reed trial, when we talked about the verdict, we said the truth is the truth, whatever happened that night. I think it's very clear what the evidence showed, that Karen Reed's car hit John O'Keefe and was the cause of him dying, right? That doesn't change the truth of what happened that night. Now, the reason we respect that verdict is you can see what happens in the news every day. What happens when people don't respect some outcome? They go burn things down. I didn't say that we should get rid of the jury system. I didn't say we should call all of the jurors to harass them. In fact, I said the opposite. I said, jurors, maybe you don't want to talk because maybe you don't want your name out there. They haven't done that. That's their prerogative. But in fact, I said, do not harass jurors. Do not harass witnesses. This case is over. There's not going to be anyone else charged. This case is over. The jury has spoken. We have a jury of our peers, and this is our constitutional system. We have a system designed to let innocent people, to make sure that there will be guilty people who get off in order to ensure that innocent people are not convicted. To avoid wrongful convictions, you have to have a broader net to allow for guilty people to not be convicted. That's respect for the system. And the fact that that word is used to somehow signify agreement is dangerous, because I think the fact that we do not understand what respect means is the very core of our inability to have discourse in today's day and age. And that is a dangerous place. In no part of today's episode did we say Combs, they should go after him for X, Y, and Z, or, everyone should start a media campaign to overturn it, or attack the prosecution because they didn't do a good job. None of those things. The system worked as it was intended to, unless we find out about jury misconduct or prosecutor. If that happens, yeah. And that has nothing to do with respect. Something has gone awry, and we need to ensure that the protections are in place to have a judicial system that works, that justice is blind. But unless those kind of things happen, it's not lack of respect. It's a problem in the system. I respect the jury system, but you have to, especially in this case, if I think, he's a very violent man who's done very, very horrendous things, you have to understand and dissect what has happened and what went wrong. That may come off as lack of respect. It's not. It's digesting and dissecting what has happened, so that, and we do this all the time after our case, it's called a debrief. We have to go on and try additional cases, and we want to make sure we learn from our mistakes. Was it the storytelling? What was difficult? What did we overcharge? Did we undercharge? Were the predicate acts too confusing for the jury? Did the flow of witnesses, get the story mixed up? Did we not properly prep our witnesses? Should we have taken a different tact in order to better tell the story so that we can reach justice for the victims in future cases? This analytical thinking is crucial, and every lawyer does it after a trial, but also I think all of us should do it at all times. So we shouldn't be robots who accept whatever the overlords tell us about any decision. You can we do it too. When the Supreme Court comes out with a decision and we disagree with it or we think it's, faulty reasoning, we say it. Doesn't mean I disrespect the Supreme Court or think we should pack the court or we should get rid of the Supreme Court or, attack them personally, which all of these things have happened, right? That people have shown up at justices' front lawns with loaded guns. That is that is a dangerous world. That is not what we advocate for. Never have we done. We've always advocated for using your brain to seek the truth, because the closer we are to the truth, the more likely we are to get closer to justice and justice for victims. And these are ongoing dialogues because no case is meant to be a plug and chug in our common law system. Every single case is going to be based on the specific facts in that case and the specific evidence that is brought in that trial. And that's why this is such an exciting profession. We are not in a plug and chug type of profession. It's exhausting and it's tiring, but it's right because each individual victim, each individual criminal defendant deserves to have their case be about them, not be about statistics or about, broad swaths of policy we want on entire groups of people. And it makes it difficult, but it requires critical thinking. So I didn't mean to get on a soapbox.
And honestly, I feel like if we could focus on that more, we probably would have fewer disappointing verdicts. I mean, that's just my thought. And Alice is right. Look, it's good. It is really good to learn from your failures if you're a prosecutor, because you don't want to fail. It is, in some ways, it is much easier to be a defense attorney because you're expected to lose. You're expected to lose. You're doing your best. You're securing your client's constitutional rights, but you're not going to win that often, right? You're typically going to lose, and that's fine. The prosecutor, though, you're making a decision to take a citizen, arrest them, charge them with a crime, try them, cost them who knows how much money, and attempt to put them in prison. You need to get that right. And when you get a not guilty verdict, it is, you don't just move on and say, well, you win some, you lose some. No, you need to learn from that. So I hope people take Alice's words to heart, because as always, she is brilliant.
Well, guys, it has been a full night of news. We hope you've learned something here. And we jumped on as soon as we heard the news, really to try and parse through it and bring some clarity for all of you, because our point is not to have that quick headline, as you can tell, as we record over an hour. We want to explain these things so that you can have access to the justice system yourselves, that you don't have to go to law school to understand these sorts of things, because you can be the difference, by the way, to fight against that sort of mob rule. All it takes, civics is something that is required really for everyone. And you can be the voice of reason for other people who may be clicking on clickbait or who don't understand why these cases come out the way they do. We hope we've been able to shed some light on that. As always, let us know what you think. Let us know if there are issues or cases you want us to cover. You can email us at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. We're on all the social medias at prosecutorspod. We love hearing from you. We have no people. It's just us. We read it all. So thank you, guys. And Brett, it's always a pleasure. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.
Woo!
Woo!
Okay. Good work, Alice.
No outline or anything. This is just an hour and 15 minutes of riffing.
There you go. My favorite episodes.
Those are my favorite episodes.
All right, I'm going to stop recording unless you had something brilliant to say.
No, we don't have any more ads, right?
We do not.
Let's see. Okay, I will call this LB, Idaho, and Diddy. You know what I'm proud about?
What are you proud about?
This was the only time we covered Diddy.
I know. I'm kind of proud of that too.
Only because it was just, it's incredibly, like I said, salacious, but it's just sad,
Yeah.
The
whole thing
LB,
was...
Idaho, and Diddy.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish it turned out differently, but it
Yeah.
just felt like this is the way it was going for a
Yeah.
while.
It's a messy case. I don't, like it. So we've always said this before. Well, we've always said this. Really bad grammar. We've always said this. Sometimes you bring hard cases and you might lose. You know that you have the evidence for it and you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, but you recognize that it's a messy case. And so they were, I think all the facts that came out, they were right to bring it. Right. I mean,
Oh yeah,
he has no
absolutely.
criminal history, y'all. He has no criminal history. And look at all the criminal history that was, put on
At least now
display.
he's a felon,
At
right?
least now he's
I
a
mean,
felon,
he
and
gets
this is
caught with a
all out there.
gun.
Yeah.
Who knows, right?
Yeah.
So
It's true.
anyway.
I don't know where things save in this computer now.
I know that's the problem.
I'm
It's
very
hard.
confused.
Apple's a little less intuitive than
I thought
but
I
I've started figuring it out. I'm faster than you. I've already got mine saved, got it exported, everything.
I got it saved. I just don't know where it's saved. I put it in the prosecutors folder, but now I don't see it. Okay, let me check the other folder. I'll save it again. I don't know.
Now I'm already uploading. Look at that.
Don't make fun of me.
Usually you're way ahead of me.
No, you are very good. Okay.
You do look great. I love the cameras on this.
They're guys, we don't look this good in real life. I don't know what's happening.
I need to carry this camera around with me all the time.
Okay, let me export again. Let's see.
No, he cannot.
What?
Pharmasaurus Rex asked if the judge can still give the death sentence. He cannot.
No. Okay.
And I don't agree with that. I think that's one of the stupidest rules we have. I don't understand why juries give death penalties. In some states, juries do a lot of sentencing stuff, but to me, it should be the judge. But that's not the rule. So
I think it's too much to put on a person.
It's way too much to put on a jury.
It's too much to put on a person to decide if someone gets death. I think emotions get in the way rather than like parsing through the evidence. I don't know where this is going. What the? Okay. I'm going to have to figure this out. Where did you go? What? It saved yesterday. Oh, no, y'all.
I'm sure it's saved somewhere.
It's saved in multiple places at this point. I just can't find it.
Judges, when you become a judge, you're taking on the responsibility of sentencing.
Yeah.
You're just sitting at home watching football, and all of a sudden you get a letter in the mail that says you got to be on the Brian Kohberger trial, and then they're asking you whether or not to kill the guy. It's like, why? Why do we do that? It doesn't even make sense. And let me just say this. The Supreme Court, in its infinite wisdom, decided that the problem with the death penalty was it was not applied in a consistent way. And so we came up with this cockamamie scheme to apply it in a more consistent way. Well, guess how you apply it more consistently? You just have judges do it. Judges are in the business of deciding, of weighing evidence, mitigating factors, aggravating factors, and giving a sentence. Random people off the street are not. You're always going to have more divergence,
right,
with just random juries deciding whether to execute somebody. It's crazy. It's the stupidest thing we do, and I don't understand it.
Wow.
And it's every state does it that way. And the Supreme Court has never said that judges can't sentence to death.
No.
But every state does it that way.
You know why? It's because the judges don't want to have it on there. Because I get it. It's a big thing. You want like kind of backstops. Okay. I was able to export to my.
Yeah.
All right. We have it.
At least Florida went back to override. Which the thing is like about override, so like the jury says no death penalty. The judge can say, well, I want to give them the death penalty. So you're getting death penalty. Why not just cut the jury out? If you're going to have override.
What this is. It is. It's hard because we have the like imperial master, which is the one judge versus like the people. That's what it is. It's a constant balance that we have to strike. And I'm still going to go for the jury system, as imperfect as it is.
I'm fine with the jury system, but not for sentencing. Juries going back to like the Magna Carta didn't sentence people. That was a judge's job. It's wild.
Well, judges now are.
Juries find facts. How is deciding someone's sentence a fact-finding operation?
Well, when you're talking about enhancements, I can see that. But you're right.
Fine. Have them find the enhancement and the judge can decide.
Yeah.
Have them decide, did they kill more than two people? Yes. Did they use unusual cruelty? Yes. Did they fire into a vehicle? These are enhancements. Did
Yeah.
they fire into a vehicle? Yes. Did they kill a child? Yes. Did they kill a police officer? Yes. Jury's found the enhancements. Now the judge decides. What's that?
Death penalty. Just kidding.
But whatever.
Okay.
And then you wouldn't have to do this whole death proofing thing that makes it all so
The
hard.
death proofing thing is the death penalty system really is. It has to go through an overhaul. There is just I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
10,000. Like, how are they going to sift through 10,000 jury questionnaires?
No way. There's
That's
truly
insane.
no way.
That is
And you know there
insane.
would have been a long trial. There probably would have been at some point with the amount of press around this. Let's say you were even able to pick 12, 2 alternates, 14 people. You can just imagine they would have to pick like 10 alternates, truly.
At least. Kim,
least.
death proofing is what you do to make sure that the jury can both give the death penalty, but also is not so inclined to get a death penalty. It won't be automatic. We call it death proofing.
Especially, by the way, like the Luigi case. This is the climate we're in right now. Can you imagine with like the Luigi case where we're celebrating people who've point blank murdered, people on the streets of New York, and you're gonna have like a death proofing. We have Diddy who like agrees that he did all these things and he got off, on the serious charges. So this is why this makes complete sense for the prosecution.
And people who are like, "Oh, Diddy's brand is so tarnished." You people are
No,
crazy.
It's not. He's gonna make so much money on this. Are you kidding?
Yes.
This was like the greatest. I didn't even hear about Diddy until this trial. Like for the last 10 years.
Somebody was like, the year after he gets out, however long he stays in prison, year after he gets out, he's going to do like a baby oil ad in the Super Bowl. One shot. I mean, that's what it's going to be like.
Yeah,
his concert series after he gets out of prison.
He's
How
gonna
much think those tickets
He's not. He's not losing any money on this.
Yeah, disappointing. It's disappointing, but whatever. Yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, this has been fun as always. I don't know when we'll see you guys again. We got to do West Memphis 3. Somebody left a review and it was like, guys, y'all need to wrap this West Memphis 3 thing up. Like 12 episodes is too much. I'm like, 12? 12?
Baby, multiply that by 2.
Yeah. What are you talking about, man? Buckle up.
Oh, anyway. My goodness. It's true. So. It is true.
All right. Okay, guys. See y'all later. Love you, mean it. It's been fun. Bye, Alice. You're the best.
You're the best.
As always.